Right, we've got our drawings done, but as I've said earlier, if we actually use the drawings that we have here on the watercolour we're going to paint on, you can see all these sort of guidelines that haven't quite rubbed out, and the messy bits and the finger marks and the pencil marks here, there and everywhere, and the guidelines are going to make our watercolour paper an absolute nightmare to try and paint on, and it really is going to look a messy painting and ruin things before we get going. So we need to have a way of doing the drawing the way we want it, but then being able to transfer that image like for like onto the watercolour paper, but in a clean and tidy fashion. Now I use this trace down wax-free pure graphite tracing paper. Now you can see if you get it on your fingers, it does make them quite messy, and it will easily transfer onto the paper. I mean, that's the whole point of the thing, but you have got to be a little bit careful with it. Having said that, it does rub off very, very easily with a putty eraser. I'm going to imagine this is our sheet of watercolour paper, and I'm going to carefully put this down in the area up here that I want to draw these houses, but I've got to be careful that I don't slide this paper on the watercolour paper because it will smudge. I'm carefully going to put my original sketch over it and just hold it in place. Now I'm using a pencil, or you could use a ballpoint pen. Right, I'm just drawing quite carefully but quite freely down the outlines of these houses. Right, if you're a little bit methodical about tracing this down like this, it's a lot easier to remember where you've actually drawn, because you obviously can't see over some of these darker lines. Now in this case I might draw all the verticals here of these windows, and then as I've done here is to come back and draw all the horizontal lines. Pound to a penny, I'll find that I've missed some lines. You always do, but of course by just lifting up the tracing paper very carefully from time to time, you can remind yourself the bits that you haven't yet drawn in or that you've missed. Right, I'm going to leave that now. I'm not going to put any more lines in. If there's anything that I've missed out, I can put them straight in on the watercolour paper itself. So I'm going to carefully, again without moving that graphite paper, I'm going to carefully lift this off. Now you can see I've missed out a couple of roof lines, and they're represented by the slightly darker lines I've got here, but that's dead easy to sort out, much easier than trying to draw things in, get the perspective right, remove all the guidelines, and then keep a clean piece of watercolour paper. Right, now in this sketch here I've just done a very rough sketch on a piece of lined writing paper. You can see I've been messing around, changing the shape of the stern and fiddling around with the bows and changing that as well. I put some shading in here which I don't particularly want to start with in the drawing, but I'm quite happy with the overall shape of the boat that I've got now. I want to put that down onto my watercolour paper, and I'm shading quite strongly incidentally on a rough piece of paper underneath. But I'm actually, by shading, I'm almost creating a replica of the traced down material. Now if we quickly draw the outline of the boat that I'm happy with in the end, you can see via that we've got the nice clean tidy version of the boat that we were looking for. If you want to, you can go over it and make it a bit darker with your pencil. Okay, so there we are. There's two alternatives. You can see that I've sketched over the ghosted lines that I've traced down, purely so that you can see them a little bit clearer on camera. But to be honest, if I was doing a watercolour painting for myself, I'd very rarely trace over the ghosted images once I've used this tracing paper.